Chapter 6. The Miracle Touch. As Roman lay unconscious on his bed, his family and Nadia were at a loss as to what to do. Mrs. Rosemary sat by his side, tears streaming down her face as she watched over her son. Nadia, standing at the doorway, was also in tears. It was then that Nadia made her request to Mrs. Rosemary, "Give him to me, he's useless." But she couldn't complete her sentence as she broke down in sobs. Mrs. Rosemary embraced her, realizing how Nadia always asked for broken things and miraculously fixed them. Mr. Forbes, who had been standing outside the room, overheard the conversation and made the decision to move Roman to Nadia's room. He asked his servants to transfer Roman and they did so with care. Inside Nadia's room, the air was heavy with sadness. The entire setting was somber as Roman lay unconscious, his eyes open but unable to speak. Nadia went to the washroom to freshen up, and when she came out, she looked like an angel in a white gown. She opened the window to let in a cool breeze and approached Roman. She prayed to God for a miracle and, with tears streaming down her face, she touched Roman's face. Suddenly, blood started flowing from Roman's nose and his eyes slowly closed. Nadia ran outside, screaming for Mr. and Mrs. Forbes to come quickly. Something was happening to Roman. They rushed to the hospital where the doctors ran more tests, and were amazed by the results. Roman's tumor was gone and he was healing rapidly. They called it a miracle and medically impossible. Roman and his family returned home, but not without incident. Emily, who had been away during the crisis, returned to the Forbes mansion with a brand new Lamborghini, which she presented to Roman as a gift from her father. Roman didn't even look at her. Emily was greeted by a cold and distant Mr. Forbes. He immediately informed her that she was no longer welcome in his home and that she was to leave immediately. Emily, who was used to getting her way, was taken aback by Mr. Forbes' sudden change of heart. "What do you mean I'm not welcome here? I'm Roman's wife," she protested. "You were never truly welcome here, Emily. I made a mistake by asking my son to marry you, and I see the error of my ways now. I should have listened to my son's wishes and allowed him to make his own choices," Mr. Forbes replied, his tone firm and unyielding. "But what about the Lamborghini?" "It is a gift from my father to Roman," Emily argued, trying to grasp at any straws to cling to her status. "Keep it. It's yours. I don't want anything from you or your father. Just leave and don't come back," Mr. Forbes said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Emily, now realizing that her time in the Forbes mansion was truly over, retreated to her car in a huff. She got in her Lamborghini, started the engine and drove away, her mind filled with thoughts of revenge. But little did she know, that chapter of her life is closed forever. As Emily left, Mrs. Rosemary held Nadia's hand. "Nadia, my dear, I know you have been through a lot these past few days. But I want you to know that you have always had a special place in our hearts. You are like a daughter to us." Nadia looked up at her, her eyes full of confusion and hope. "Mrs. Rosemary, what are you trying to say?" "I am saying that my son, Roman, has always had feelings for you. And I know you have feelings for him too. I have seen the way you look at each other and you healed him," Mrs. Rosemary said, as she smiled at Nadia. "But Mrs. Rosemary, Roman is married to Emily. And I am just a servant," Nadia said, her voice trembling with emotion. "That marriage is over. All the legal formalities will be taken care of. Roman has never truly loved Emily. He only married her for his father's sake. But now, he sees how much you truly mean to him and how much he truly loves you," Mrs. Rosemary replied, as she squeezed Nadia's hand. Nadia's eyes widened in surprise and joy. "Mrs. Rosemary, are you asking for my hand in marriage for your son?" Mrs. Rosemary nodded, her eyes shining with love and happiness. "Yes, Nadia, I am. And I know that Roman would be the happiest man in the world if you were to say yes." Nadia felt her heart swell with love and gratitude. She looked into the eyes of the woman who had become like a mother to her and said, "Yes, Mrs. Rosemary, I will marry your son. I love him with all my heart." Mrs. Rosemary hugged Nadia tightly, as tears of joy spilled from both of their eyes. Mr. David also embraced Nadia. They knew that this was the beginning of a beautiful love story, one that would be filled with happiness and joy. Nadia and Roman hugged each other, while Mr. and Mrs. Forbes watched on, holding hands. The love and healing that Nadia had brought to the Forbes household was undeniable. Roman had been given a second chance at life, and Nadia's healing touch had truly been a miracle. The Forbes family and Nadia knew that they would always be grateful to her, and they would always remember the miracle that she had performed. As the days passed, Roman's health continued to improve and he and Nadia grew closer. With the blessing of Mr. and Mrs. Forbes, they were married in a small ceremony at the Forbes mansion. The Forbes family was forever changed by Nadia's presence in their lives. They had learned the true meaning of love, forgiveness, and the power of healing. They knew that they would always be grateful to Nadia for the miracle that she had performed and for the love that she had brought into their lives. And as for Nadia and Roman, they knew that they had found their happily ever after, and that they would spend the rest of their lives together, healing each other's hearts.